For as long as I can remember, I have always been fascinated by Lahore. Not just the Lahore we see today, but the Lahore that existed before 1947. I have spent years exploring those historic streets, walking through walled Lahore, visiting old Havelis, Gurudwaras, Mandirs, trying to understand the people who once called this home. Every old building feels like a witness. Every street remembers something. And every doorway leaves me wondering who lived here before us, who walked those streets, who laughed in those courtyards, and where did they end up going? A few days ago, I watched Main Vapas Aunga, a film by Imtiaz Ali, and it reminded me of something we often forget. In our pursuit of building goals, chasing careers, and creating a life for ourselves, we sometimes forget where we come from. We remember the dates, we remember the borders, we remember the leaders, but we often forget the people, the emotions, the memories, the lives that existed in those very streets before history changed their directions. The film reminded me of the very thing that I believe in and that this channel stands upon, that behind every historical event are ordinary people carrying extraordinary stories. And perhaps nowhere is that true than the partition of 1947. Because some people do not leave home once, they leave it every single day. In the smell of rain that reminds them of another place, in an old song that carries them back to a forgotten street, in a recipe that never quite tastes the same way again. In their stories, they tell their children about a home that they have never seen, and sometimes they spend an entire lifetime carrying a promise. Main vapas aunga. I will come back, not just to a house, not just to a village, but to the world that disappeared before they even had the chance to say their goodbyes. Today, we will not be talking about politics. We are talking about people, emotions, and the memories they left behind. About ordinary families who woke up one morning in 1947 believing they were exactly where they belonged, only to discover that history had other plans. Before partition, life across Punjab, Bengal, Sindh, Delhi, Kashmir, and countless other towns was never defined by borders. Life was imperfect, as all societies are. There were disagreements, there were prejudices, there was difference. But there was also something else: familiarity, the kind that's built over generations. A Sikh family borrowing tools from a Muslim neighbor, a Hindu merchant sharing tea with a Christian colleague. On Eid, sweets traveled from house to house. On Diwali, lamps illuminated the entire neighborhoods. On Vaisakhi, music filled the fields. On Christmas, church bells became the soundtrack of the city. People spoke different prayers, but many shared the same language, same market, same songs, and often the same dreams. And only a few could imagine that this would very soon disappear. Then came 1947. Rumors spread, fear grew. Families began making impossible decisions. Many left believing they would actually return in a matter of few days. But little did they know. Some carried the keys to their front doors, convinced that they will come back one day. For many, those keys were later remained tucked for the rest of their lives, becoming symbols not of a house, but a promise that was never fulfilled. Countless families believed that they will come back, see their neighbors again, laugh, smile, and be a part of that shared culture that once lit up those streets. But temporary departures became permanent. one of the largest migrations in human history had begun. An estimated 14 to 15 million people were displaced. Hundreds and thousands, and perhaps million lives were lost. But numbers cannot tell the story, because partition was experienced by one family at a time, one street at a time, one goodbye at a time. Among those who suffered the most were women and children. Thousands of women across all communities were abducted and raped. Many disappeared, many returned, carrying burdens that could never be put into words. Children carried different scars. Some separated from their parents. Some arrived in refugee camps alone. Some were too young to even remember what they had lost. Many grew up hearing fragments of another world, a village name, a family tree, a college, a mango tree, pieces of home that now only existed through stories. The journeys itself were very exhausting. Families traveled by foot, carts, and overcrowded trains. They carried what they could possibly hold: clothes, utensils, photographs, jewelry, and the August heat was relentless. Water was scarce. People walked for days. Parents were worried constantly, not about where they were going, but about whether everyone would actually arrive together in the same place. And yet, amid darkness, humanity still prevailed to some extent. There were neighbors who protected each other, strangers who shared food, families who hid those in danger, people who chose compassion when fear would have been easier. But these stories matter too, because they remind us that even in humanity's darkest time, kindness survives. Eventually, moving past the border, people rebuilt their lives. New homes were constructed, new businesses were set up, children grew, families found stability again. But rebuilding is not the same as replacing. Many carried reminders of where they had come from: an old photograph, a family recipe, a faded letter, and a house key that no longer opened any doors. These objects became more than possessions. They became proof that they were once part of a life that no longer exists. Proof that memory could survive even when geography changed, from grandparents to parents to their children's and so on. Stories crossed generations, even when borders could not. Perhaps that is why Main Vapas Aunga resonates so deeply. Because return is not always physical. People have moved away. The world you know and were once a part of just no longer exists. Like that. The friend who never got to say goodbye. The parent who locked a door, believing that they will return. The grandparent who spent their entire life describing a village with tears in their eyes. Because history is not only about what had happened, it's about what you carry forward. The promises they never stopped making. Because for some of us, that promise is personal. Sometimes I wonder how many people spent their final days in this world thinking about a place that they could no longer visit. And so the partition of 1947 wasn't just the biggest migration in history. It was for a reason. Because you remember the leaders, you remember the dates, but you always forget the people. Ordinary people with extraordinary stories. And perhaps that is the true legacy of partition. Not the borders that were created, but the memories that refused to disappear. मेरे परदादा अब्दुल रहमान खान जिला लुधियाना तहसील जगरावा पिंड कोटली तो हिजरत करके आए सन। ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਦਿਲ 'ਚ ਇਹ ख्वाहिश ਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਮੈਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਜਾਵਾਂ, ਉਸ ਪਿੰਡ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੇਖਾਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗਲੀਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਰਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਾਂ ਜਿੱਥੋਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਹਾਣੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ Bridging Perspectives ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਨਾਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੋਚ ਆ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਇਹ ਪੁੱਲ ਉਦੋਂ ਬਣੇਗਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਹਾਣੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਲੱਭਣ ਲਈ ਵਾਪਸ ਜਾਈਏ, ਨਫ਼ਰਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਾਰ, ਸਰਹੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਾਰ, ਯਾਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ। As we end this episode, the most important question is not what happened in 1947. It is what we choose to do with its memory today. Nearly 8 decades have passed, and perhaps one of the most meaningful steps the governments could take is to make it easier for ordinary families to go back and visit those places, those streets where they once belonged. Because when someone stands in front of their ancestral home, 70, 80 years later, something extraordinary happens. History stops being statistic, it becomes personal. A Pakistani visiting Ludhiana, an Indian visiting Lahore. Bridging Perspectives is not about agreeing on everything. It is about understanding each other's humanity. It is about recognizing that before there were borders, there were people, families, friendships, and communities. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay our older generations who lived through partition is not simply by remembering their stories, but by ensuring that the future generations have the opportunity to reconnect with them. Because sometimes peace begins with something very simple as allowing people to go back home, even if only for a visit. And maybe, just maybe, this is how we begin to bridge perspectives.